Welcome to the Superhero Sidekick Leadership Coaching Podcast with Joel Smith and Joe Baker. We're here to help you develop your superpowers. This is the Superhero Sidekick Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Smith.
I'm Joe Baker. We're not here to be the superhero. We just want to be your sidekick and help you along in building your business, building your not-for-profit. Let's help you grow it fast and really scale.
Be sure to check us out on Facebook and visit us at superherosidekick.com. I am with my friend Joe Baker, and Joe Baker and I are doing this for the first time in the same location. I actually haven't seen Joe for probably 18 years, so this is exciting. So Joe has a friend that is on the virtual show today that's doing some really, really big things around the world. I'll let him tell you a little bit about him.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited about this show in particular is I'd say this is probably the smartest guest that we've ever had on with the largest vocabulary. We're used to having entrepreneurs on here who, a lot of them didn't finish college. Some of them didn't even finish high school. But our guy today, Michael Miller, is a genius, and he's a writer. He's also a theologian, if I understand that right, and he's written a film called The Poverty Cure, which really had a tremendous impact on my life and how I viewed poverty. A lot of the ways that I thought we were helping end poverty really weren't working, but he looked at it in a new way and from a business perspective. And so I'm really excited, and particularly today, to talk about the subject of how to end poverty with Michael Miller. And I don't know if there'll ever be an end to poverty, but one of the ways, the way to do it is through business and commerce. And I'm so excited to look at it from that perspective instead of just looking at it from charity. And so with that, Michael, why don't you share with us a little bit about how you came to that perspective that it wasn't just about charity that would end poverty, but it was really through business that's going to raise the most people out of poverty.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show, Joe and Joel. And I think if you think I'm a genius, you need to get out more because, but I will say, I mean, I think I just want to share the fact that you talked about all the, entrepreneurs who drop out of college and everything like that. I did terrible in college, so maybe I did the wrong thing. I should have become an entrepreneur, but instead I did go and do graduate school. I decided I had to redeem my bad grades. So anyway, it's good to be with you. And in fact, I also want to say I've been listening to your podcast. You when you told me about it, I started listening to it. I found it really profitable on some of your conversations with people, and I know very helpful in thinking about work that we did with Poverty Cure and our documentary film Poverty Inc. And also just my own work and the work at the Acton Institute where I am. So I appreciate being on the show. So I guess the questions or the ways I began to think about these. I mean, I'd been thinking about some of these ideas of poverty for a while. When I lived in Japan, I lived in Japan 5 years, and I did a graduate degree in international development. And it was a kind of a social engineering model of how to think about solving poverty. So whether it was either charity or these like big projects to solve poverty. And so it's something like bothered me about it. Didn't make sense. And, reading a lot of different people, one of the things that kind of came to the fore as I began to think about these things. And I also studied philosophy. And so here's where philosophy becomes really practical. So I studied philosophy of the person, which is the area that I spent a lot of time in. So I'm not a theologian. I'm actually trained in philosophy, but I do read a lot of theology. So, and what does it mean to be a human person? And so these 2 or 3 areas, and I also always thought business and entrepreneurship and marketing, all these things are very interesting. I also have an MBA. So all these kind of areas came together, and thinking about poverty, and we tend to kind of ask the wrong questions. We ask a couple of questions I think that are wrong. So the first is we ask like, well, why is there poverty? But the real question is, why is there wealth? All right. And then we ask, and we can go through these, but then we say like, what can I do to help? And that's good. I want to be really clear. I'm not telling anybody don't be charitable. I'm not telling anybody don't care about the poor. I know you use scriptural references a lot on your podcast, right? James, in the letter to James, pure religion, right? He says is to care for the widow and the orphan in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. And I think sometimes we either choose one or the other. We either try to keep ourselves unstained from the world, or we focus on kind of social justice issues. But I think it's interesting that those two together are pure religion. So in no way am I suggesting we shouldn't care for the widow and the orphan and those in need. But generally speaking, for most people in poverty, especially in the developing world, right, like in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Asia, the reason people are poor is not simply, the main reason is not simply because they lack stuff. They're not simply poor because they don't have stuff. They're primarily poor because they are excluded from these institutions of justice, which I will talk about, that we have here that we take for granted. So things like clear title to land, just who owns the property that you're on, right? Ability to get your court case heard, rule of law, participation in the formal economy. And I think, let me just jump in like as an example, but I think we need to, maybe develop these. But imagine you guys are business guys. Imagine if you said, well, I don't know who owns the property. It could be taken away from me whenever I want it, whenever somebody who's more powerful to it. I can't get my court case heard. It's going to take me 20 years. It takes a year and twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times national average income for me to register my business. Are you going to be an entrepreneur?
Wow.
Are you going to be an entrepreneur?
I don't think so. I mean, that's
no, right?
Unless you're really good and willing to go over all those barriers.
Yeah, some people won't get over that hurdle for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, most of us, right? We wouldn't. And so we and let's kind of wind back to that. But so all those questions began to ask, like, well, why? So the first is not why is there poverty, but where does wealth come from? And then second, what can I do to help? I think the better question is, what do people in poverty need in order to be able to create prosperity in their own families and their own communities? And then how can I come alongside them to do that? And so those were these kind of, those were two big question shifts that and again, I'm not the only person who says this. I mean, we did this film with a number of people and a lot of influences, a lot of people have influenced me. So those are the first two questions that were the part of the shift. And then the second things were actually philosophical and theological questions. And so, we oftentimes think, okay, philosophy and theology, that's theoretical stuff, but I want to be practical. But the mental model that we have, how we actually think about work, the dignity of work, how we think about time or productivity, these are actually philosophical and often theological questions that shape the way how we're going to make decisions. And so I would say there are a way we think about poverty and business and helping poor people. And I would say, and these are like the dominant models of charity. And I think they infect Christian charity and they infect secular organizations. And so the first one is we tend to treat poor people like objects of our pity, objects of our charity, objects of our compassion, instead of treating poor people like subjects. And I don't mean subjects like in like a subject of the king. I mean a subject in the grammatical sense, like you and I are in a conversation, right? So there's 3 eyes, right? 3 eyes in a conversation, right? Because we're each a subject. We're not an object to be manipulated. Right. We're subjects to be respected. But when we treat poor people like they're objects of our compassion. And so that's the first. And again, we can talk about these. I'm going kind of big picture first. The second, I think, is actually a theological one. And that is we've replaced charity with humanitarianism. So what do I mean by that? Let's think about what charity is. Charity comes from the Latin caritas, right? And it's one of the theological virtues, right? Faith, hope, and love. So love, charity is love. And love, right, is not just a feeling that we feel, right? Love is an intentional willing of the good of the other person. So to love is an act of the will to seek the benevolence and the goodness and the flourishing of another person. So that's what charity is. Now, humanitarianism is kind of a secular, hollowed out version of Christian love, where what we do is we have these limited horizons. So I can't see past here to you. I'm stopped at simply providing comfort. So humanitarianism doesn't think so much about the human flourishing of the person. It provides comfort. Now, in an emergency situation, we need to provide comfort. But for the most part, poverty in the developing world is not an emergency. It's a chronic problem. And so we use this emergency model to provide comfort instead of thinking about human flourishing. And then if you take a Christian view, we also take the eternal destiny of that person in mind, right? So this shift from charity to humanitarianism, now we say, okay, let's just give you what you need in your material goods. But let me ask you a question, put it in like hard terms. So Joe, do you have little children? I have children as well.
Three of them.
Three of them. Okay. I've just had my seventh, number 7, just arrived.
Wow.
So we're very happy about that. And if let's say you were in hard times, okay, you lost your job, things are rough, you're going through difficult times. And I say to you, Joe, listen, I really care about you. So why don't we do this? I'll take your children and we'll raise them or we'll put them in an orphanage here for a while. And so you don't have to worry about it. Right. And you'd say, what? I want a job. I don't want you to take my children. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mean, that's extreme, but that actually happens. Those kind of things happen, right? People are like orphanages get set up where there's economic incentives for people to give their children into orphanages. And we actually talk about that in the film Poverty Inc. That comes up. But just think of it in other ways. Like that's an extreme one to kind of make the point. But just think about it in other ways. Like, oh, Joe, you know, here, let me give you something. Well, yeah, maybe that's good for a day or two. If I gave you, $1,000 to help you get through, a little bit of time. But you don't want that. You want to produce and take care of your family. You want to do it yourself. What you want is opportunity and access. But when we think about poor people, we often, again, treat them like objects in a humanitarian model, and we don't treat them like we would want to be treated. So here I've just given these nice theological, philosophical events, but now let's put it to practice. When we operate with a bad mental model, we do activities that actually harm the poor and disrespect the poor instead of partnering with the poor and treating them like we would want to be treated ourselves.
Right. Seems like we're just looking at the quick fix, like the secular model in a lot of ways, or at least the humanistic model, is to just solve the immediate problem and not necessarily solve their long-term well-being.
And I read in that book, When Helping Hurts, about the God conscious that you get. This is something you probably have spent a lot of time thinking about. When you try to solve poverty in the way of just writing a check to somebody or like kind of giving to them certain times of the year, it ends up forming this complex where you actually begin to think that they need you and that they're not humans made in the image of God, but that you actually are this necessary component, in your giving. And it really begins to make you think that they're somehow inferior to you. And really, it's like they're not inferior to you. Like they just haven't been given the same opportunities. They haven't had a set of mentors in their life. They haven't had people that, led them on the way to wealth like you had, and it's really what people need is they don't just need money. They need someone to actually take care of them. And my son Sam, he was asking me the other day. There's this guy that's always standing at our grocery store, and he's always standing out there asking for money. And Sam says, "Well, why is that guy standing there, Dad?" And I said, "The reason that guy stands there, Sam, is because people pay him to stand there. That's why he stands there, because they're going to keep giving him money to stand there." And they said, if he's ever not going to stand there, somebody really has to do the hard thing and invite that guy into living in their basement, right, and actually begin walking that guy or mentoring that guy to go back to move in with his parents. Someone has to do the hard thing of not just maybe giving the money is a part of it, but really handing him money is actually going to keep him in poverty. And in so many ways, we've done that to people.
I think you hit on, and I think a core element that goes back to this philosophical point, right? That we need to be in relationship with people, right? There's a really good book by a man named Chris Arnott, and it's called Dignity. That's the name of the book. I actually interviewed Chris for my podcast, and Chris articulates it, I think, really well. So he is a physicist, and he finished his PhD in physics and then worked on Wall Street for about 20 years. And he started to take these long walks into some of the poorest places in the United States. And he began to just meet really poor people and people who were engaged in like prostitution, people who were in drugs. And he talks about how he started kind of seeing them as their savior, and then began to realize, no, I just like, they're people and they need to be treated with dignity. And so he gives a really, I think it's worth looking at his book. And again, as I say, I have this, my self-promotion, I have a podcast interview with him, but it's worth looking at his book from the American perspective, because we're focusing on the developing world. But I think you're right that in order to actually help somebody in the long term, we need to be in relationship with them, right? Now, does that mean, and I want to reiterate that every person is going to become an entrepreneur? No. Does that mean that sometimes people don't need loving care and assistance because they're in immediate need, and like they don't need a job, they need loving assistance? Of course, right? But I think what happens is if you only take a one or the other, right, you miss the idea of actually how we engage with persons who are in need. And that's really important. And that, I think, it completely shifts the way, and as you said, of doing the hard work to be in relationships with somebody who may need something that you don't understand and wouldn't be able to give them until you're in relationship with them, because they're a person just like you and you don't know their needs until you're in relationship with them.
Oh, that's excellent. So, Michael, another part of this too that I see is that we have this need to be in relationship with people, and so when people are in need, they definitely have that, but they need that more than what they need pity too, right? They need somebody to come along and love them, care for them, help them to secure themselves and to learn what they need to learn for the future, not just pity. A lot of times, pity followed by $100 bill that'll help them for a day, but that doesn't help them down the road. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, partially I'm thinking, and it's also, I think that we don't want to objectify people. They're not objects for us to fix, right? We all are broken. We all need help in different ways, and poor people need help in ways that maybe rich people don't, right? But they're not things to be fixed, And you mentioned this idea about it creates this kind of divine complex that we are somehow going to help save the world. We're a hero, save the world. But it also actually hurts the people we're trying to help. So in the Poverty Inc. documentary, I interviewed a Senegalese entrepreneur named Magat Wade. And so she has a cream and lotion company. She's Senegalese. She lives in the United States now, but she's Senegalese. And she gives this example. She said, it wires the brain of the poor person to think, I'm not good enough. I can't do this, right? This, even like the whole celebrity campaigns, it's always highly emotive and sentimental, and the wealthy person comes in heroic, and the poor person, gets our need. I mean, there's just so many examples that I could go into where that just, it hurts the giver and the receiver.
Yeah. I just want to say, articulate more of how it hurts the giver, because I think that's the most interesting piece of it, is that when you give money to somebody just for the poor, and you get this good feeling in you, and you're driving home because you gave the guy $20, how does that hurt you? And I haven't answered this, but really I want your answer with a higher vocabulary to answer it.
No, you have to give yours first.
No.
What's your answer? No, what would you say?
Well, really, it's just a matter of not understanding who God is and who you are, and that it's just by God's grace that you're where you're at, and that guy doesn't need you in the universe to take care of them. That wasn't, you aren't fulfilling some great purpose there, in the same way as if you really entered into a relationship with somebody and you were there to, actually build them up. And, because what that person, I believe that what that person needs fundamentally it's not that they have a lack of money, it's they have a lack of human relationship. They have a lack of other people in their life that are really going to help lead them out of poverty. Not necessarily to start a whole business, but maybe it's to just help them to have a warm place to stay, and then carry them on to go out and get a job. And a lot of people don't know how to do that, or else they wouldn't be wouldn't be in that
Right.
situation.
Well, yeah, I think there's maybe a couple ways we could talk about it. One, I think it's important. So Chris Arnott writes about this well, is that sometimes we also have our vision of what success looks like. But not everybody wants that same vision of success. Now, I want to be careful here, because sometimes in the developing world, you'll hear people say things like, "Oh, well, they're happy to be poor," and all this kind of, stuff. No, that's not what I'm saying, right? People want to create prosperity for themselves, but I'm saying sometimes we take like our notion and we impose it upon people. Well, like, for example, you need to get a job, get a good education, get a job, move out of your hometown. What if I don't want to move out of my hometown? I mean, this is something that Chris Arnott deals with really well. People value home and family and community more than they might value material success. So that's one thing I think we have to keep in mind. Now, I think you're giving an example, Joe, of like somebody who's really in quite dire need. They're in poverty. They need to get out of that poverty. And I think there again, I think you hit on something important, that when you said, how does it hurt the giver? Well, you've already kind of addressed it. It's a self-aggrandizement, right? It makes us use the big word for you. It's just, it makes us feel like we're awesome and that we're the hero and we're the greatest. Well, in a sense, if you think about it, say from philosophically and theologically, like, so what does Jesus say? I come to serve and not to be served. Okay. But in that service, which you're going after, it's not about making you the best. It's not about like, who can score the most humility points, right? It's about actually engaging with another person. But here's another way, and I'll give it like, think about something to think about. So in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there's a definition of sin. Okay. What do you think is the first definition of sin?
You're gonna have to tell me.
Yes. Well, what's a sin?
Is it pride? Is it pride?
Well, yeah. Well, that's one of the deadly sins, right? There are 7 deadly sins, and pride is the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. So you've actually maybe hit on something I wasn't going to go to. But if all this heroism makes you proud, then you become susceptible actually to the deadliest of sins. Okay, but that's one. But the first definition of sin is an offense against reason. Sin is an offense against reason. Well, let's think about what that does. So if we treat someone like an object instead of a subject, it's an offense against reason, because that person is created in the image of God, a subject willed for his or her own sake, right? And when we treat them like an object, we isolate like something about them and objectify them. So why is lust, for example, always a sin? Because lust sees a person who has hopes and dreams and wants and fears and is a child of God, and it takes the person, it isolates their sexual values, and it turns them into an object to be used. So that's an offense against reason. It's an offense against the dignity of the person, and therefore it's a sin. Okay, now obviously with there's less gravity to treating someone as an object of charity. Okay, there's less gravity, but again, it's not reasonable to treat that person, and so we habituate ourselves to treating people as things. And when we habituate ourselves to treating people as things, it's bad for them, it's bad for society, and it's bad for us, right? Because it doesn't do justice to reality, right? And so it's an offense against reason, because it doesn't take reality seriously.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm going on a different track because we don't normally think that way, but that's why I brought it up.
And it also doesn't help that person out of poverty. It actually it holds them in poverty. It enables them. It
can sometimes actually make their situation worse. And so that's what we've seen a lot with, like, say, foreign aid, for example, where it politicizes development. It's actually created harm. Malik Fall, who's another Senegalese actually entrepreneur, he said that aid has delayed the development of business in Africa. It's kept Africa behind. It's prevented people from developing their own businesses. Sometimes actually our help, which is erratic and short term, will actually put out of business local entrepreneurs, right? So in the long term, it hurts the economy and long-term development. And I think it goes to something that's related to your podcast, that business has something to offer, right? Beyond just like, marketing and goods and services. Business actually has important social benefit beyond charity. the act of being in business, providing goods and services for others, and thereby being able to make money for yourself and your family is a socially valuable thing. And I think we sometimes forget that in poverty. So, and just to quickly, why are we wealthy in the United States? Why are there entrepreneurs in the United States? Those are two distinct questions, but we're wealthy in the United States because we have a commercial society where people are allowed to create businesses and prosperity. And that's the way people get out of poverty. And so oftentimes we apply business to our own life, but when we deal with poor people, whether it's here or in the developing world, we sometimes think, oh, well, they just need charity. Well, maybe they need that type of entrepreneurial opportunity as well.
Well, Michael, this has been terrific. You are well. Joe called you a genius, so I think now listening to you, I think you've got so many wise things to say. We really appreciate you taking this time to spend with us. So for our listeners, how would they get a hold of you if they wanted to learn more about what you do, or maybe how would they find you on your podcast?
Sure. So I'm a senior research fellow at the Acton Institute, and you can learn us about Acton at acton.org. And you can learn about the documentary Poverty Inc. at povertyinc.org and povertycure.org. And then you can learn about me. My website is michaelmathesonmiller.com. And my podcast is called The Moral Imagination. And so I've been doing it just for about 21 episodes now. I'm doing a couple more. I'm hoping to get, maybe I can get one of you to join the podcast and talk about your work. It's called The Moral Imagination, and you can find it on Apple and Spotify and all those places, and also at themoralimagination.com. And I'm also on Twitter at mmathesonmiller.
Well, hey, thank you, Michael. Any last thoughts, Joe?
No, I'm good. I'm like really stoked on this show. I can't wait to hear what people think.
Yeah, we would like to invite you also. Please leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Let us know what you think of Michael as well. We'll certainly pass along the information. Subscribe. You can also check us out at superherosidekick.com. So thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate this. Tune in next time.
All right, catch you later.